Good morning to one and all present here. It takes me immense pleasure to welcome you all to the online lecture series presented by Intersections B.H.U, which is an informal academic platform under the aegis of Faculty of Arts, Banaras Hindu University. The purpose of this online lecture series is to address young minds of scholars, academicians, and mostly PG students, and bring about an awareness of the recent and ongoing studies in the sphere of academics. Today, we have among us an esteemed speaker, Dr. Anandita Pan, who is presently working as an assistant professor of English in the Department of Humanities and Social Sciences in IISER, Bhopal. Ma'am has done her PhD in English Literature from the Indian Institute of Technology, Kanpur, during which she worked extensively on caste and gender in India. Her interest lies in feminist theory, literary theory and criticism, labor and reproduction, and the list runs long. So, without further delay, I, on behalf of Intersections Banaras Hindu University, welcome you, ma'am. Before we begin, I have a few requests for the participants. Participants are requested to put their questions in the chat box. All the questions will be answered in the question answer session, which will be followed by the lecture. I also humbly request all the participants to mute themselves and not to share their screens. Thank you. Once again, I welcome you, ma'am.
Thank you so much, Vaishakhi. I hope I am audible.
Yes, ma'am, you're audible.
Okay, so thank you so much, Vaishakhi. First of all, let me begin by thanking the Intersections group and also Dr. Vivek Singh for extending this warm welcome. It is indeed a great pleasure to be sharing some of the ideas that are pertinent now. And this is an extremely relevant and pertinent area that where the dialogues are going on. So the ideas that I will be presenting today, those will introduce some of the basic understandings of caste and gender and how they intersect. So the purpose here, or rather my aim here, is that these questions will lead to more observations and more questions. So I would really urge all the people here to think of these questions as the preliminary base on which we can set some of the our own views and come up with our own queries. So, without further delay, I would like to begin my presentation. Uh, am I visible? Can you see the presentation?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so you can see the PPT, right?
Yes, ma'am, it's
Okay.
visible.
So today's presentation is titled New World, New Challenges, Intersection of Caste and Gender. Now, all of you must be very familiar in social media, and suddenly, the feminism words like feminism, gender, caste have become quite commonplace. And it really makes us wonder, and there are a lot of opinions about it also. So it really makes us wonder what are these terms and how do we really understand them. Okay? So the very title, New World, New Challenges, is basically a sort of bringing together of older things and newer ideas. So what I'm trying to convey here is that the problematics of caste and gender have been existing for thousands of years in different forms, different cultures, different practices. But as they come down, they have a very dynamic form in nature. Okay? So as they come down through history in different geographical regions, cultures, religions, they take up different forms. And that is why when we see caste and gender now, we really need to understand vis-a-vis the past and put them in conversation with the present times. So this is why I make it, I term it as new world, new challenges. Now, before I go into the intersection, let's look at some of the main issues that caste and gender have brought about, especially in the past decade or so. So, the first picture that you are seeing is one of the pictures that was taken during the movement against the Mumbai dance part ban. So, in 2005, the government of Maharashtra they banned bar dancing, saying that it is illegal and it promotes a kind of obscene sort of culture among people, and it also promotes bad behavior among men. So the Maharashtra government said that Mumbai dance bars, from now on, bar dancing is banned. Now it immediately gave rise to a huge opposition by feminists of all over India, and they said, as this picture says, we support the bar girls. And the reason they supported it is because the feminists argued that by dancing in the bar, it's actually giving them a chance to earn their livelihood. So instead of seeing bar dancing and connecting it to morality, we need to really see, how their livelihood is getting affected by these kind of bans. So the feminists therefore connected, women or rather gender to that of labor, and said that how the government, by connecting gender with the notion of morality, actually suppresses women and thereby takes away their means of livelihood or means of survival. Okay, so the first issue that we come across here is that of gender and labor. Now, the second is a much more contemporary one, which all of you must be familiar with, which is the film The Dirty Picture. And it was, the main actress is, of course, Vidya Balan. So the film became a huge success commercially, and it gained a lot of support from a lot of feminist groups. Why? Because it flaunted, its sexuality. So the film became a kind of representative image of women flaunting their own sexuality and their own body image. So the particular scene of the film, which has become iconic, is when Reshma or rather Silk goes to collect the award at the ceremony, and she says that even if people will keep commenting about my body, and I will keep flaunting it. So that is seen as a kind of ultimate assertion of sexuality and of body. In feminist discourse, this is seen as a kind of agency or choice. And why it becomes so important? Because when it comes to gender, previously we talked about labor. The other issue that becomes very important is body or the representation of the body rather than that. So what happens is the body in Indian culture is always supposed to be covered. Okay, so when a woman is, and it's mostly for the enjoyment of the within the domestic sphere. So what happens is when a woman by her own choice reveals her body, it becomes a problem for the society. This is the reason why, in the West, we have movements like the bra burning, or even here we had pink chutney and things like that. So what happens is, in all these cases, the feminists are claiming that we want to free our own bodies. We need to have claim over our own bodies. We don't want others to have claim over our bodies. We can do whatever we want with our own bodies, right? And recently there was a a Facebook post in Kerala where an activist she posted her new picture with her kids, and there were lots of oppositions and support also, and those in favor claimed that, and she herself claimed that, see, my children have come out of my vagina and they are getting nourishment from my breasts. So I want them to get, familiarize them with my own body. So what is so wrong with that? Okay, so these problematics of body have become highly, relevant of late. And this is why the dirty picture is seen as one of the films which is promoting this kind of body positive, or rather the idea of choice and agency in women. So, if we think about the ways of inequalities, when we talk about gender, we necessarily come across, broadly speaking, very broadly speaking, the binary of male and female. And as you may already know, when we talk about gender, we necessarily need to distinguish it from sex. So, sex is basically the biological identity, which is also related to the biological organ, the sex organ one is born with. So depending on a penis or a vagina a child is born with, the gender or the sex is assigned to the child, whereas gender is more socially constructed. So once a child is born as a male or a female, that child is then molded or constructed into a man or a woman through social mandates, through the parents, through schools, through families. So it happens in a very social, cultural sort of constructed manner. And this is why I say that we need to separate sex from gender. Now, so the idea of gender is very much rooted in binarism, and of course now we have come across many definitions of many sexes, many genders, and even challenging of gender as a category. But to begin with this binarism, what happens is we see a clear hierarchy between male and female, where the male is always, or the rather the masculine ideals are always put at the top, and the femininity and feminine ideals are always seen at the bottom. So the systemic oppression that is responsible for this kind of binarism and this kind of hierarchy is termed patriarchy. Now, it is very important to remember that when I mention patriarchy, it is basically a system. I'm not claiming that men are oppressing women. Okay? We need to understand that it is a system which is creating this kind of inequality. And men and women both can be equal participants in this kind of oppression. A prime example of which are the Bollywood serials we see these days, and in fact for a long time. So there we have very problematic characters like mothers-in-laws or aunts who are always oppressing the daughters-in-laws. And what happens is that they are imposing the ideals of how a woman should be, how a bahu should be, how they should stay in the house, always keep the veil on. So what happens is we can see them as agents of patriarchy. Okay, so take for example a film like Water, Deepa Mehta's, and what happens there is the lady who is actually running the ashram. She is in fact dominating women and using them as tools to earn money. So she can be seen as an example of how a patriarchal agent, so to say. So we understand that when it comes to gender or the gender oppression, it's patriarchy, the system which is predominantly seen as the culprit. Now, next comes the issue of caste, and for that, we can go to a very recent case, which is Pune March in 2016. Now, this was a 10-day long march in Pune, where in response to the beating of Dalits, where for so this became a huge problem and a huge movement, and as we can see, the posters there carried that "Hood the way, Avna the way." So the UNA began and they linked it to Rohit Vemula's suicide as well, and they highlighted the systemic oppression once again that is caused by caste. Okay, So caste, what is caste system? Caste system is basically once again a system which hierarchizes the Brahmin, creates a hierarchy between four castes: the Brahmins, Kshatriyas, Vaishyas, and Shudras, and also includes another caste which is lowest among the lowest caste, who are known as the underprivileged, who are now who have claimed this identity called Dalits, because they want to say that we do not want to accept the untouchability that is assigned upon us by the Brahmins or the Brahminical society. Instead, we are claiming our own identity. So people like Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, Jyotirao Phule, Ramasamy Periyar, they have all created a corpus of anti-caste movement. And recently, Una March became one such example where, with leaders like Jignesh Mevani, it became a huge voice against caste oppression. Now, if we come to caste, what happens is, as I mentioned, so caste is defined by the idea of untouchability. Okay? But this untouchability is practiced in many ways. Untouchability in terms of sharing a space, eating food. So all these things, as I mentioned, is caused by a system called Brahmanism. So once again, we need to remember that this is a systemic problem. It's not enough to attack a single person, or we should not be blaming a single person for creating the system or for practicing it. Rather, we need to see it as a hierarchical system which creates these kind of oppressive structures.
So we see that caste and gender have their own ways to function. Gender is directly countering patriarchy, and caste is challenging Brahmanism. But what happens when we do an intersection, and why diagram? What we see here is that two but are these categories always okay? And this is where this idea of intersectionality comes in. Now, before I go into how they intersect and why they intersect and why do we need to talk about intersection of caste and gender, I would like to talk about the theory of intersectionality. So, intersectionality or the theory of it was first propounded by, or rather made popular by Kimberly Crenshaw in her famous article Mapping. So, to between forms or systems of oppression, domination, or discrimination. Now, Crenshaw gives the example of black women and says that when it comes to white feminism, it promotes the concerns of only white women. Similarly, when it comes to anti-racism, it only promotes the concerns of black men. In both the cases, black women who are specifically oppressed by gender and race, their concerns get erased. So, when it comes to white feminism, it is assumed that all women are affected by patriarchy equally. And when it comes to anti racism, it is assumed that all black people are equally affected by racism in the same manner. And Crenshaw believes that we specifically need to understand that black women's concerns are affected by and gender both, and not just race and just gender as two exclusive categories. And this is why she says that we need to recognize the multiple so to give an example, instead let's say caste oppression or gender oppression as two distinct and separated forms of oppression, we need to see as how they inform each other. And how it happens, I will be explaining through examples later. Simultaneously, to go back to intersectionality, as it challenges multiple axes of oppression, it also challenges the homogenization of categories. So when intersectionality is saying that we can't claim that all women are equally affected only by patriarchy. It is saying that we cannot homogenize the category woman either. There are differences based on race, based on class, based on caste. So we need to understand these specificities and these differences. So the idea of difference and specificity become crucial in the theory of intersectionality. Now, so this is the broader theoretical framework. In terms of the methodological approaches, Leslie McCall gives two ideas of how intersectionality can be seen as functioning. So she terms it as intercategorical approach. So this is a category where we identify difference among people. For example, women and Dalits. Okay, so we are seeing that how Dalit women in the intercategorical approach are seen vis-a-vis women and vis-a-vis Dalit men. Okay, so this is among categories. Okay, the intra-categorical approach, the next one, is basically talking about difference within categories. In the sense, called women, there are basic differences among them based on caste, class, etc. So to go to we gave the example of anti-racism and black politics. Now, similarly, when it comes to Dalit politics and mainstream Indian feminism, in the predominant approach that is taken, almost always the focus is exclusively on caste, and how it happens we will come up we'll see later. And gender is often erased as a category of analysis. Similarly, in mainstream of Indian feminism, gender is seen as the sole category of analysis, and it does not recognize casteist patriarchy as a frame of reference. So, as a challenge to this kind of erasures and ignorances, the term Dalit feminism has emerged. Now, Dalit feminism can be defined as a discourse aimed at establishing a feminist articulation from Dalit women's point of view. And what is it? So, Dalit feminism, basically, the term was popularized in the 1990s, and it got established as an academic category through the publications by Sharmila Rege, Uma Chakravarti, and so on. So, what Dalit feminism does is that it is almost, it functions similar to something like Black feminism, where it challenges the exclusivity of caste and gender and says that we need to see them as functioning together. Okay. So, drawing on intersectionality, it is rooted in the idea of difference, where it proclaims difference from Dalit politics and mainstream Indian feminism by highlighting intersection of caste and gender. And how it does so? It does so by arguing that instead of seeing patriarchy as solely focused on gender, we need to see it as casteist patriarchy. And this is where the idea of
dual patriarchy is coming. So, what Dalit feminism claims is that if we want to talk about the specificity of Dalit women's oppression, we need to recognize that not all women are affected in the same way by the same patriarchy. So, for example, when we are saying that Indian women in the 19th century are affected by patriarchy, in the sense that they are always closeted within the domestic sphere, they are not allowed to go out in the public. We cannot say the same for Dalit women, because for Dalit women they are oppressed both. They have to go out of the house to work, and when they go out, they are often sexually harassed by upper caste people. And when within their house, they are often beaten up by their, by Dalit men. So what we see is two kinds of patriarchies working here. One is Brahminical patriarchy, and one is Dalit patriarchy. Now, Brahminical patriarchy functions in a very nuanced manner through
ideas of purity and pollution, which I'll be discussing in the next slide. So, the first thing that we come across is the gender through the lens of caste. And what is gender through the lens of caste? When we talk about an intersectional lens, we really need to see how they are intersecting with each other. So in this slide, we are talking about the two cases which we have already talked about, and we can see how gender, if we do a reading of gender through the lens of caste, what kind of ideas we get. And since most of you are students of literature, I'm guessing this kind of analysis also is akin to literary analysis. So let's begin with the Mumbai dance bar ban, which I already talked about. So as I mentioned earlier, this dance bar ban was actually heavily criticized by feminists because it divided the women, the bar dancers, of their livelihood, of their independence in terms of their survival. Now, on the other hand, interestingly, the Dalit women organization in Mumbai, they actually supported the ban. And why so? This is a very interesting thing. So the committee called Dalit Mahila Vichar Manch. So they said that this culture of bar dancing directly links to that of Devadasi. So they said that before talking in support of dance bar, what we really need to see is who are these girls who are often becoming bar dancers. So, and they did a study where they showed that it is mostly the Dalit girls who are either kidnapped or due to their poor situation, they are forced into these kind of professions. So even though this is seen as a profession where they are earning money, it is actually a kind of continuation of the systems of Devadasi. Okay, where they were always, the lower caste girls or the Dalit girls were used for enjoyment by upper caste men. Okay, so bar dancing is seen by Dalit women as, or rather Dalit feminists, as a continuation of such practice, and it is for this reason that they supported the ban. Okay, and how it happened, so which is also very interesting with the dirty picture as well. So the dirty picture, as I mentioned, it actually promoted women's agency and choice in terms of sexuality. Now, the film is actually based on Silk Smitha, a South Indian actress who was, a famous actress in terms of, her item dances. Okay, and she was a lower caste woman, and this film, while promoting this idea of flaunting sexuality, actually suppresses the undertext of caste. Okay, or the identity of caste that Reshma does not talk about basically. And how do we see caste functioning in that film? So for that we need to make a comparison between Surya Khan's wife, which is played by Nasiruddin Shah, Surya Khan's wife, and who is an upper caste woman, and Reshma or Silk, played by Vidya Balan. So what do we see here? So Surya Khan's wife is presented as a very prim and proper woman, always dressed in the ethnic traditional Indian garb, which is the sari. She does not talk loudly. She always stays within the house. She is almost like a domestic goddess. Okay, and even when she comes to know of her husband's affair with Silk, she is not telling her husband anything. Okay, she is not retaliating. On the other hand, we see Silk, always dressed up in revealing clothes, and she is treated by Suryakant only as an object for use. Okay, Suryakant in fact tells her that you are there only for use. I cannot. You are not suitable to become my wife. Okay, so this is a very interesting dichotomy of wife whore binarism, which is specifically rooted in Brahminical patriarchy, okay, in the idea of casteism. So, according to caste, in fact, some books like Manusmriti, we come across this idea of purity and pollution. So, upper caste women or Brahmins are seen always as pure, and Dalits or lower caste are seen as necessarily born impure. Therefore, they are always considered untouchable. Okay, so this idea of purity is something that directly impacts the practices like keeping upper caste women within the household. So if you come across, texts like Amar Jivan by Rashundari Devi, she says that, I am staying within the house. It's almost like a prison. Women are always kept within the domestic sphere. Uma Chakravarti has a very interesting reading of Pandita Ramabai in this case. So what happens is, by keeping them within the domestic sphere, the idea is that the Brahmin woman's purity, sexual purity, will be protected. So that is why we see, and this is a classic, representation of how we see Surya Khan's wife. On the other hand, when it comes to lower caste people, they are considered untouchable and impure, and lower caste women are already, seen as born with impurity. Therefore, they are, capable only for use. They are not capable to become wives in the household of the upper caste families. So we see that if we do a Dalit feminist reading of the film, we will see that how these Brahminical patriarchal ideals are actually continued in the film, are actually represented in the film. And this reading therefore challenges the mainstream notions of agency and choice on the woman's part. And especially notable is the fact that, the silk in the film, who is a lower caste woman, only gets typecasted as an item girl, okay, a vamp hypersexual figure, and does not get cast as a heroine ever. So, this is a very interesting fact that she is only cast as a vamp hypersexual woman, as an item, dancing in the item number. So, when we do a Dalit feminist reading of, gender, so to say, or see gender through the lens of caste, we really come across a very different understanding of how of the events like Oh My Dance Bar Ban or the Dirty Picture. And this is why it is important to identify these issues as, conjoined with each other. Okay, we cannot see caste as separated from gender. We need to see how they work with each other. Now, the opposite spectrum, similarly, we can do is see caste through the lens of gender. Now, I have already talked about the Una March and why it began. Now, the Una March gained tremendous popularity because it really brought anti-caste movement to the forefront. Now, interesting, however, is that in this march, the Dalit women activists were completely silenced or neglected, and there are instances where, a Dalit woman activist named Manisha Mashal from Haryana, she tried to go on the stage and say something, and she was pushed down. Okay, then she really had to fight her way through the stage and go and speak. And in certain cases, when Dalit women tried to talk about their issues, it was completely silenced as being not important. Okay, so we see a kind of erasure of gender in this Una March. And the next issue I'd like to talk about is the Khairlanji massacre in 2006. So this Khairlanji massacre, to give a brief context, it was basically a massacre of the Bhotmange family. So the Bhotmange family had actually purchased, Dalit family had actually purchased some land, and their children were going to school, so they were, in terms of Dalit terms, they were affluent, and this land was bought in adjacent to the upper caste land. So the upper caste people got enraged, and a group of monks, they came, they raped the two women in the family before killing them, and they lynched the sons in the family. So this became a huge issue in 2006 as an example of caste oppression. And what happened, the way this oppression was seen to be functioning is in terms of, both caste and class. So Anand Teltumde has done a wonderful study of this, massacre, where he says that this kind of, was a direct impact. So the Dalits traditionally are not supposed to own anything. Okay, you may remember the Mahad Satyagraha in 1927, where Ambedkar took a group of people and they claimed to drink the water from the Chavadar tank. So Dalits did not have the right to drink water from the common tank or collect water from the common area. They did not have any right to own any land. So they were constantly seen or kept in the position of slave, okay, or enslaved. They were completely enslaved. That's why we have texts like Slavery by Jyotirao Phule. So to get back to the Khairlanji massacre, what happens is, Teltumre makes such brilliant reading where he says that it's this massacre was, initiated because the Dalits had owned some land.
Okay, and that was not seen as something they should be doing. So what happened in the consequence is that we see how caste is also linked with class when it comes to such kind of anti-caste sort of analysis. On the other hand, however, what happens is the idea of gender is often ignored, erased completely in this massacre. And why do we need to talk about gender? It's because this massacre specifically begins by the rape, the gang rape of two women, two Dalit women. Now, what does it mean to publicly gang rape two women? So, in a sort of Dalit feminist understanding, public gang rape signifies a control over the entire community. In very simple terms, to say in very simple terms, by raping the two women, the two Dalit women, the upper caste people are showing that see, you cannot even protect your own women. How will you protect your land? You dare buy a land. You can't protect the women in your house. How will you protect your land? So this is a very, in very simple terms, how this kind of, sexist violence happens, where the women their bodies become the site to practice caste violence. Okay, so this is the reason why it begins. This massacre began with the rape and public rape, and that in a public display to undermine the masculinity of the Dalit men and the entire Dalit community. Okay, so we really need to see these kind of issues not just as caste oppression, but as heavily linked with ideas of gender and gender oppression. So this intersectional lens, therefore, recognizes caste slash gender, and here I mention the slash not because not to indicate an opposition, but to indicate intersection. And it does so by proclaiming difference from Indian women and Dalit men. It says that when it comes to Dalit women, we need to see that they are specifically oppressed. Okay, so this kind of issues like public gang rape, Devadasi, these upper caste Indian women or Dalit men, they are not affected by it. It's extremely specific to Dalit women. So through intersectionality gives us that opportunity to see this specificity. Moreover, it highlights dual forms of patriarchy. So I was talking about Brahminical patriarchy and Dalit patriarchy earlier. And through examples like the dirty picture and the Kailaji massacre, we see how Brahminical patriarchy sees Dalit women as sexually available and uses their bodies to control the entire community. Okay, so in this way, the intersectional lens actually highlights the dual forms of patriarchy, and it also challenges essentialist identity politics. And in what sense? This is another interesting aspect because it says that although we are talking about Dalit women, we cannot restrict Dalit feminism only something that is by Dalit women for Dalit women. Okay, that would mean that keeping the entire responsibility of Dalit feminism only to Dalit women. Rather, theorists such as Sharmila Rege and Uma Chakrabarti, who are clearly not Dalit women, and they have practiced Dalit feminism immensely. So what they claim is that we really need to consciously understand our own position vis-a-vis caste and gender, and then create an understanding and build solidarity with other women. Okay, so it is in this sense that it does not become an essentialist identity politics. Rather, it gives hope to build solidarity and affinity. Okay, so Dalit feminism actually is remarkable for its epistemological intervention. So it identifies sites of knowledge production as rooted in Brahminical and patriarchal ideologies. So, for example, these ideas of purity and pollution. It is through Dalit feminist lens that we see where are these ideas coming from? What are the bases for those ideas? Okay. So who creates these ideas and how they, very subtly get reflected and perpetuated in contemporary retellings. Even though, like the dirty pictures, even though they seemingly they talk about agency and choice. And simultaneously, Dalit feminism produces a new interventionist knowledge, intervenes in the existing knowledge, and provides a new knowledge through intersectionality. So here I have listed four, texts which are rather articles, which can be seen as some of the foundational articles in intersectionality. Two are from the West. One is Kimberly Crenshaw's Mapping the Margins. Another is Leslie McCall's The Complexity of Intersectionality. And in the Indian context, we have Mary E. John's Intersectionality, Rejection or Dialogue, and Nivedita Menon's is Feminism About Women. So with that, I would like to stop my presentation and thank you so much for listening. And please, I welcome any questions or answers. Thank you.
Okay. Good. Thank you so much, ma'am, for your thought-provoking lecture. I now invite Vivek sir for the discussion.
Um, Thank you, Anandita. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Hi.
I'm sorry, my camera is not working. Today I figured it out in the morning that there's a problem in the camera. So I'll talk to you like this. So yeah, the first thing that I noticed that the very purpose for which I invited you to give a talk is fulfilled in the sense that our PG literature students could understand that on what line gender and caste are intervening, and if they are thinking of pursuing research in this particular area, so they know that how they can map out, how can they map out the intersectionality of Dalit women along with uh, upper caste women, or let's say the differences that it generates within the group. So, and also that to understand certain things that you talked about, the kind of sociological framework that you provided and anthropological literature through which you can reach to certain understanding. So I'm extremely delighted to say that the kind of a methodology that you framed and the kind of basic line through which you could clear the concept of gender, and then we have a caste, and how do we need to understand gender and caste. And obviously, within the 40 minutes, we can just give the ideas which they can take away for further their research. Certain things which I was thinking when you were giving talk, the second part when you're talking about the sexual economy of Dalit women, right? Before I come to the question, like I want to throw up certain things for debate, or let's say for discussion, or let's say if they want to carry forward further for their study. In the sense that when we think of the feminism, right? So it goes without saying that we don't have a feminism, we have a feminisms. So let's say, for example, when we are talking about that Brahminical feminist, right? So how do Brahminical feminists, and this is not a question, this is a point where I want my students to think on. How do Brahminical feminists talk to Dalit feminist, right? So one thing is pretty clear that Brahminical feminisms have a different from Dalit feminism. So let's say, for example, when they are looking at the history of the discourse on women. So if you are mapping out the genealogy of Dalit women, then how does it go? You can take from the pre-colonial, then to the colonial, and then to the post-colonial. And the second very important paradox, which we need to we need to also put it on inquiry, is that upper caste feminists have certain luxury, which Anandita was also talking about. Upper caste feminists have a luxury to escape the caste persona, right? So, so when they are escaping the caste persona and they are only turning to the problem of a gender and women, so how are we going to look at this Brahminical discourse whose history has moved towards making itself as what Anup Marao talking about is anti-caste, progressive and feminist, right? Uh, anti-caste, anti-caste, progressive and feminist. So which means to say that is politics possible when Brahminical feminism is interested in, let's say, asserting or dominating the very idea of the feminism. So the question for us too is that can feminism and caste sit together? Can they sit on the same table and can they talk to each other? Right? That is the one idea which I want my students to take away from this. And Anil, when we're talking about the sexual economy, suddenly I got recalled of the widows, right? Let's say, for example, widows, if they are dying, and uh, there is a term called social debt, right? So there's a term called social debt. So let's say, for example, when there is a widow, there's an interesting paradox which you also talked about that when there is a Dalit woman, she is oppressed by Dalit men, as well as the very larger framework of the gender and caste together. And most importantly, what is the difference is this that a women from upper caste, not universally, but most of the time, they don't have to go outside for work, right? They don't have to like the labor politics, which I'm talking about. Whereas in the case of Dalit women, they have to go outside and they have to produce the labor, right? So the labor becomes another different phenomena. And interestingly, when you're talking about certain anthropological cases, I got reminded of the Kerala caste atrocity where the women from lower caste, I may be wrong because I read it 4 years before, so I may miss the point. They don't have to cover their upper parts when they are working in the field before upper caste men. Right? So if they are covering their upper parts of a body, it is insult to upper caste men, right? I'm talking about the Kerala. So here I'm talking about that how feminism is going to address this issue where they don't have to face this. And even in that line, Western feminism cannot also address this problem. Right. So, Anandita, I would like you to speak on certain things, right? Like just to,
yeah. Thank you so much, Vivek, for opening the floor. And these are, this was specifically my intention that my presentation will, give rise to more questions and queries. So to begin with your, ideas. So, of course, what you said is absolutely correct that we cannot debate all women. Okay. So in certain cases, upper caste women do not have to face certain kinds of oppression because they don't go out in the public. And as I mentioned, Dalit women, due to their poverty, they have to go out and work in the fields or do other kinds of work. Okay, and they often face, sexual harassment, assaults by men outside. So these are some of the specificities that we definitely need to remember when talking about feminism in India. And as we mentioned, that there is no single feminism, there are feminisms with an S, and it's ever growing with the recent LGBTQ movements as well. The idea of when it comes to, especially you have mentioned the idea of the widowhood. Okay, so widowhood is once again extremely rooted in Brahminical idea of purity. So after marriage, okay, or rather after the death, a woman is always seen to be protected by the husband. Or the father, husband, or son. So after the death of the husband, woman becomes a threat, or rather her sexuality becomes a threat. So widowhood or sati are imposed on the woman to keep them either kill them and as Ambedkar mentioned, to take care of the extra problems in the society. And what happens is that widowhood is either they're killed or widowhood is imposed, that they are completely isolated, their hair is cut off, and they are dressed in a very unsexual, very unappealing white dress, which will not be sexually appealing at all, and they are kept in isolation. So widowhood, really much controversy is very pertinent. How widowhood becomes a kind of idea that is perpetuated through, this theory. So, kind of grammatical reading of gender, the past reading of gender is useful by understanding both upper caste women's situation and the Dalit situation, and highlighting how they are different from each other, and both are connected to these ideas of caste and gender intersection, right? What I would also request all of you to really think about is that when we are talking about these intersections, the idea is not to say that okay, upper class men are bad or upper class, Dalit men are bad. Rather, the idea is to advantages that Dalit women have, or systemic disadvantages that caste and gender create for different groups of people at different times. Now, the second question that Vivek asked was the concern here really is whether feminism and caste anti-casteism can come together and really sit at the table and begin dialogue. And this is exactly what is lacking right now. Because mostly we see these two movements as completely, excluded from each other, and that is why we really need to talk about how it can come together. We can do it in many different ways. In movements, we can do it in an academic platform like this one, where more and more ideas will get generated and newer thoughts will emerge. So I hope Vivek I have answered your question.
Like I wanted you to also to open more.
Yes. Open. Okay. So, I think if I start answering some of your questions also, which are given in the chat box, we will come across some other ideas as well. So, yes.
I mean, what we wanted in the beginning, like in the beginning of the talk, just to open the floor. Now we have the questions. I think Baisakhi will ask one by one.
Okay, absolutely, yes. So see, the idea of this talk was to generate new ideas about caste and gender. So when I started this presentation, the scope due to the time was very limited. So I have talked about let's say caste, gender, vis-a-vis class. I have talked about labor. I have talked about different kinds of professions like bar dancing, labor dancing. I have referred to them. And also I have talked in terms of body and sexuality, in terms of representation, and also in terms of violence. Okay. So if we really make, this is a kind of long list, and as Vivek was saying, that as for you who are PG master students, maybe looking for doing research, these ideas can then be modified to expand further and come up with potential thesis, at least a potential paper. Okay, so I really hope that these are the ideas that you take away from it. Okay, now I will request Vaishakhi to ask me questions.
Thank you, ma'am. We have a question by Aryaputri Satyapragyan. Ma'am, if we want to bring a positive change, then we have to explain it to people. So my question is, how would you explain it to someone who has never heard it before? What are the ways, basically?
Okay, so thanks who has never heard of intersection or Dalit feminism before, and what are the ways of talking about it. So I would really say that to begin in a very simple language. Here the language becomes very important because a lot of times, if we, many, all of us have attended lots of academic, lectures and all. A lot of times we are just lost in jargons. So my aim would be to completely strip that my conversation off the jargons and really present it very, very simply. So I would begin by giving actual examples, such as in the Una March, what we saw is that even though we were talking about caste, the Dalit feminist activist, she was not allowed to go on stage. Okay, so there is clearly a kind of erasure that is happening here. I would also give examples of something popular, like the dirty picture, and say that even though we see it as very enterprising and sexually very encouraging, actually it is not, and why it is not. Okay, so I would really encourage our discussions to begin in a very simple language with popular contemporary examples, if possible. Yes, Vaishali.
Thank you, ma'am. The next question is by Dalit. Ma'am, can the structural agency of choice be deconstructed? Also, if you could comment on Vogue's controversial video on choice featuring Deepika Padukone and shed some light on rational choice theory.
Okay, Pragya, are you there? Pragya? So before I start answering your question, can you explain a little bit what you mean by structural agency of choice? This is just to, for me to give a better answer.
Good afternoon, ma'am. Ma'am,
Yeah.
ma'am, like the question that I was asking, it was structural agency. Like, if there is a structure that we abide by, for instance, it's patriarchy, that is that, and in that we are provided with some, kinds of agency that under patriarchy we have liberty of this, and then this is to be followed way after the other. So if structure is there and we are being provided the agency and we think this is the agency and we are overlooking the structure that is providing that agency, so is there any way to deconstruct that?
Okay, so if I have understood you correctly, so let me first responding to this idea of structural agency. So patriarchy, whenever we talk about any structure or system, like patriarchy rather, so system, I would say. So these systems, it's not like they are giving any choice or any agency. Rather, when feminism is talking about agency, it's contradicting this system or structure called patriarchy. Okay? So the idea of agency and choice emerges through contradiction. Okay? Through countering the predominant structure or the system. So in essence itself, it's kind of deconstructing the structure, so to say. So it's not like the structure is giving certain choices to us. In fact, the opportunities that a structure like patriarchy are giving are oppressing us. Okay? So instead of seeing them as opportunities, we really need to see them as systemic imposition, so to say, ideology. So feminism is trying to already challenge. Now, as far as I hope I have answered your question, is that clear, Pragya? Okay. Vogue's controversial video on choice featuring Deepika Padukone. So I have not watched this video, unfortunately. So I cannot really comment on it. And rational choice theory once again is it's a bit problematic to talk about it once again, especially with reference to feminism, because the idea is very oxymoronic in nature. Because the concept of rationality is once again rooted in highly androcentric and patriarchal or rather
masculinist idea, because whenever we talk about nationalism, it is always posed in market category sense in opposition to emotion, which is associated to women, right? So we are again coming across this binary of rational emotional. So once again, this rational choice theory is a very problematic and oxymoronic term to deal with here. Yes, Vaishali, any other question?
Yes, ma'am. We have a question by Arnab Panda.
Okay.
Ma'am, can you please explain, please repeat your views of Dalit patriarchy and Brahminical patriarchy in reference to dirty picture?
Okay. So, as I mentioned, that there are dual patriarchies called Brahminical and Dalit patriarchies. As a result of what we see in Dalit feminism. When it comes to the dirty pictures, we mostly see Brahminical patriarchy functioning here. We don't really see much of Dalit patriarchy, so to say. So the way Brahminical patriarchy functions is by promoting Brahminical ideologies of patriarchal oppression. What do I mean by that? So, I gave the example of the contrast between Surya Khan's wife and Silk in the film. So, Surya Khan's wife is always dressed properly. She is considered the ideal wife, okay, who always stays within the house. So, once again, to go back to the Brahminical ideals, this refers to the idea of purity of the Burqas woman, which is reflected both in her attitude and in her appearance. On the other hand, we have somebody like Silk, who is Surya Khan tells that you are only there for use. You cannot become my wife. And why so? This idea is rooted in caste. Since she is a lower caste girl, Dalit woman, lower caste people are always seen as born untouchables, okay? As born impure. Therefore, they are not suitable to be deemed as wives of upper caste men. Okay? So it is for this reason that we see lower caste people only for use value. Okay? And it is for this reason that silk is only used in the film. And we can see Brahminical patriarchy occurring in this way. Yes, Vaishak. Any other question?
Yes, ma'am. The next question is by Vidya Mathur. Ma'am, could you please shed some light on how caste... I'm sorry. Yes, ma'am. Ma'am, could you please shed some light on the intersection of religion, caste, and gender?
This is a very interesting question actually. A lot of times when we talk about caste and gender, we come across things like class. But what happens is religion also becomes a very interesting aspect. I don't know how many of you are familiar with an author called Mama. Okay, and book Karuku and also Sangati. They are often talking about caste, gender, and religion. Okay, and it shows that so it basically talks about the Tamil Dalit Christian community, and historically this Dalit people converted to Christianity in order to escape the oppressions by by the Hindus, by our caste people into community. But what they realized that when they converted, the Christian community was once again retaking the same oppressive structures as the Hindu counterpart. So the upper caste Christians would oppress the Dalit Christians. Okay, so it is this way that we can see in some ways that caste, gender, and religion are functioning together. And when it caste and religion are functioning together, and when it comes to gender, actually we see that. It's Dalit women. In fact, in Karuku, Mama mentions an incident where in the school only Dalit girls are forced to clean the toilet, not anyone else. So we see that once again, toilet cleaning is another example where films like Kakus by the Banaras. So toilet cleaning is another example of association with untouchability. We have a lot of discussion going on about scavengers, about sewage workers, cleaners, and all. And how that should be banned because it's an extremely casteist practice. And here, Dalit girls were forced to clean the toilets. Once again, it's a very casteist, sexist sort of practice that's also resulting in a kind of intersection where religion also comes in the mix. Yes, Vaishali.
Thank you, ma'am. The next question is by Shrita Vishwas. Can concepts like womanism, the one rooted in Alice Walker's writing, be functional in India, where caste is a pivotal aspect?
Okay. Can concepts like womanism? I would like to is Shrita present there? I don't think I see Shrita here. Now, when we come to womanism, this is a very interesting question actually because there are lots of similarities. In fact, the feminists themselves have claimed a lot of similarities with black feminists, to say. So the idea that of womanism that as Walker is promoting, it is kind of challenging feminism of white film. So the very term itself is womanism. Okay? It's challenging feminism and the exclusivity of feminist politics. And this emphasis on white feminism is challenged here. So when we come to womanism itself, in essence, of course, we can see has some similarities with Dalit feminism. Yes, Shrita.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah.
I'm here.
Yeah. So, in essence, maybe we can say that it does have some similarities with Dalit feminism in the way Dalit feminism challenges, or both the feminisms or the isms challenge the dominance of mainstream versions. Okay. In case of womanism, it's the white feminism, and in case of Dalit feminism, it's the mainstream Indian feminism. So in both cases, these mainstream isms are challenged, and we see that how in terms of practice, okay, it will be very different because one is challenged based, another is caste. But in terms of concept, both can be seen as functioning similarly. In fact, you can refer to Patriarchal Collins, the outsider within, the article outsider within, where she talks about this kind of intersectional approaches we need to take. In fact, with the feminism, Collins is always seen as one of the persons to fall back on. I hope it explains your question.
Thank you, ma'am. The next question is by Akrima Mishra. Ma'am, could you please shed some light on how caste discourse operates in the field of Indian performing arts?
That's a very interesting question actually. So a lot of times when we come to performance, just like the media performance, both the actors and the creators are often rooted, emerged from predominant classes and so on, right? So in response to that, or rather in challenge to that, in performance actually, there have been a huge influx of Dalit performers. In recent times, in 2002, Maharashtra, Kabir Kalamanch emerged. And what they do is they take up kind of a similar format like Babul Sarkar's street play, and they talk about their caste professions. Okay? And when you're thinking about performance, once again, we are so these are some of the ways that in contemporary time in Indian society, performances are emerging from the Dalits. And if we go back to the very concept performance, so in Indian society or rather the culture, the theatre performance those emerge from very sanskritized notions such as Bharata's Natyashastra, right? Which are highly casteist and sexist in nature. So I would like to give an example of the Ashtana we come across, like 8 types of heroines. Okay? So in the Ashtana we have characters like Uttama, Madhyama, and Amama characters. So the Uttama is directly correlated with the upper caste. You should not laugh too much. You should laugh in a very mild manner. You shouldn't talk too much. That is the Uttama character. The Adhama character in contrast is somebody who laughs out loud. Okay, somebody who is completely, completely disregards the surroundings, so to say. So we can see that from the ancient times, the Indian theatrical representation or dramatic representations, encourage this kind of sort of ideas. So a lot of times we see the reproductions in the dramas. But but Dalits have tried to challenge these things through these theatrical performances such as Kavi Kalamans, and we also have a lot of songs by Ambedkarite women called Opis and Balnas, which have also challenged this kind of high low. Once again, we are coming across high low sort of performance, high performances, so to say. Yes, Vishal.
Thank you, ma'am. The next question is by Suri Das. Ma'am, don't you think that the choice of a woman of showing off her body is quite paradoxical in that although it's a choice apparently made by the woman herself, it's a choice originated in the patriarchal structure of which makes a woman's body the only locus of her essence and existence. And also, ma'am, yes, ma'am. Do
Yeah,
you think that having women show off her body, thereby objectifying them, is a Western way of functioning patriarchal control on women's body, while imposing the idea of covering a woman's body properly is the original way of controlling women's body? If so, in that case, both the revelation or flaunting of one's own body and covering the body and be morally and chastely proper originate in a patriarchal mindset.
okay, so there are several questions. So let me start, with the first one that I have here. So whether the choice of a woman showing off her body is paradoxical in the sense that even though a woman is exercising agency by showing it, it's actually a choice originated in the patriarchal structure, which makes a woman body the only locus of her essence of existence. And what I understand, what Kasturi by that is where once again by flaunting her body, once again the attention is located on the body itself. So it's a kind of paradoxical attention. Now, there are two ways of going about it. Okay? So when we talk about body, it's often considered a woman's body is considered a male property. So it's used if you read texts like Kamala Hassan's autobiography My Story. She says how her body is used and abused without her consent, okay? Without her permission. It's used and abused freely by men. Okay? On the other hand, when a woman is talking or reclaiming her body, okay, flaunting her body, it's seen as reclamation of the body. Yes, the is on body once again, but it is a kind of reclamation of the body. Problem occurs when we have issues like Mumbai ban, where this reclamation is then linked to something like the Devdasa system, where only the low caste girls are forced into these kind of professions. So what happens is when we read or look at some events, but we really need to understand it in a very complex manner. Okay, in its complexity, and we shouldn't claim universally that all reclamations are bad or good. We need to see them in their specific or in their specificity. Okay, and the second question about the flaunting of body being a Western choice and covering of the body is as an Oriental production is itself a very problematic to say because the idea of West and Orient are highly problematic. Okay, how they themselves are constructs of specific power structure. So whenever we say the West vis-a-vis the Orient, we are creating a binary. Okay, so instead of that, I would like rephrase your question in the sense that whereas covering was a part of Hindu culture in the Indian community, And I would say that covering has been predominant not just in Hindu culture but also in all other cultures actually. In Islam and Christianity also, the covering of different ways has happened. Now, what happens is a lot of times due to the prominence of radical feminism in the West, we have this misconception that this revealing of the body is a Western phenomenon. Okay, rather instead of seeing it as a Western byproduct, I would like to say that this kind of flaunting of the body was very prominent in earlier times in India as well. If you see some of the medieval paintings, look at texts like Radhika Santanam, where Lalitamita Jajan is actually talking about her own desires, her own flaunting of the body. It is actually, this flaunting of the body or openness are there in both cases. It's just how differently they have appeared in different historical junctures at different geographical locations. Yes, Vishal.
Thank you, ma'am.
Darling, I think there are a lot of questions are popping up.
Yes.
Anandita, we have to finish it off because I have asked. Just ask one question, and then I think I'm sorry for others. We can again ask Anandita to come over and answer the question. Please don't mind.
Okay, so we have a question by Pahari. Ma'am, it is often seen that women are abused in their job sections. It happens with both the upper caste and lower caste women. So here, in this case, they're suffering mainly based on their gender. Does caste create any effect section? If yes, please explain some ideas about it.
Okay, so this is an interesting, we are talking about sexual harassment in the workplace. And, two things to keep in mind here, what kind of jobs which women are doing, okay, and who are, the abusers, so to say. So to answer this, I will go to the, first case, the Vishakha judgment and the Bhavri Devi case, which actually gave rise to the, iconic anti-sexual harassment in workplace judgment act, basically. So in Bhavri Devi was a Sathin, okay, who was working for the emancipation of women in a village in Rajasthan. Now she stopped the marriage of a 1 year old girl for which she was gang raped, okay. And in response she filed a complaint, and the police said that no, upper caste men won't rape a Dalit woman, okay, they won't want to be with a Dalit woman, so we are taking this case. So still now there has not been, her perpetrators have not received any justice, but this case actually sparked a lot of events where the Vishakha judgment was passed against the sexual atrocities in the workplace. Okay, it's called the Sexual Harassment Act, the first one. So what we really see here is that when it comes to again, once again, we are both talking about workplaces. So both upper caste and Dalit women here are at the workplace. But how are they, dealing with it, or what kind of events are they coming across? So a lower caste woman, once again, if you remember something like the Keralaji massacre, Bhavri Devi is gang raped, okay, because she is a Dalit woman. So her rape is an indication both for her husband, okay, which in fact the rape happens in front of her husband, okay. So indication both for the husband that you are not man enough to protect your wife, and both for the Dalit community that you shouldn't try to stop these kind of marriages in other, in our communities, because this is a tradition that has been going on for a long time. On the other hand, this kind of public gang rape, not something that women of other castes will encounter that frequently. Okay, so when we are talking about sexual harassment, we really need to see, which people we are talking about and who are the perpetrators and the context that we are talking about.
यहाँ टांगी है कहीं भी फेंक देते हैं
So I hope that I have answered most of your
Yes, I think that was the best that we could now do with the limitation of time. Swati, Kasturi, and Manas don't mind because she has work in her department. So next time we can put forward. Okay, Dasaki, go ahead.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much, ma'am. I now
Thank you.
invite I now invite Agrima to extend the formal vote of thanks.
Good afternoon, everyone. I, Agrima Mishra, on behalf of Intersections B.H.U, extend a very sincere vote of thanks to all those who have helped us in making this lecture a resounding success. First of all, I would like to express our sincere gratitude to our chief speaker, Dr. Andita Pan. Ma'am, thank you for your thought provoking talk on New World, New Challenges, intersections of caste and youth. Your lecture provided us with a very fine understanding of the intersectionality of gender and caste in Indian society. The dual patriarchy experienced by Dalit women devoid them of their basic human rights. Your lecture problematized the mainstream popular feminist notions of oppression, agency, and choice as being equally experienced by all women. Thank you, ma'am, for this very enlightening talk that voiced some very grave,
Overshadowed
overshadowed
concerns.
concerns.
I
I
also take
also
this
take this
opportunity
opportunity
to
to
thank
thank
Dr.
Dr.
Vivek.
Vivek.
So
Sir,
it is
it is
because of
because
you
of you
that
that
we are
we are
able to
able to
receive
receive
such
such
enigmatic
enigmatic
thoughts by
thoughts by
well
well
esteemed
esteemed
scholars.
scholars.
I
I
also
also
extend my
extend my
thanks
thanks
to
to
all
all
participants
participants
for their
for their
gracious
gracious
presence
presence
and
and
enormous
enormous
cooperation.
cooperation.
Thank you,
Thank you,
everyone.
everyone.
Thank you
Thank
all.
you all.
Thanks for
Thanks for
having me.
having me.
Thank you, Anandita. Do get in touch in the evening. Bye bye.
Absolutely.
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 Thanks a lot.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks
Thanks
everyone.
everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.